Distinguished Toastmaster Ralph Dieter has been a member and an officer of Toastmasters for 14 years. He and his wife, Lois Sicking, have been active in building, mentoring, and assisting clubs, both in District 12 and District 100. He's a former U.S. Army retired veteran and a retired professor of economics. Tonight, he is bringing his positive immigrant story to this audience and hopeful to others. He believes it is important to share his story to continue what his father started in countering the Holocaust denial trend that is becoming popular in the United States. Please help me welcome tonight distinguished Toastmaster Ralph Dieter in his presentation entitled, "Tomorrow Will Be a Better Day."
Good luck.
Thank you, Dr. Shar. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, welcome guests. Tomorrow will be a better day. Without hope, you're lost or even dead. This story of my family is an answer to Holocaust deniers and one family's immigration story. It is also an attempt to avoid getting submerged in the melting pot. My story begins with my father, Olaf's immigration to Frankfurt, Germany. He was born in Czechoslovakia, but migrated with his mother to Frankfurt when he was 3. It was never easy for him growing up because Germans at that time didn't trust people who were born elsewhere. But he skillfully adapted to his environment until one day his bitter stepfather turned him into the Gestapo for being half Jewish. Feeling betrayed and desperate, he got a letter from the Gestapo telling him to show up at a let's see, where was I? He attempted to deal with this letter. The letter said that he had to appear at a train station for deportation. So he went to this concentration camp for forced labor with his head held high. He, just like he did in Frankfurt, he adapted to his new environment, as difficult as it was, skillfully. In this camp, though, the work that they did really wore them down until they couldn't work anymore because of injury or sickness. And then death usually followed. So how did my father and others survive? Because 1 in 3 died in this camp. 1 in 3. Well, most survivors had strong mental toughness. For my father, it was an attitude of tomorrow will be a better day. Tomorrow finally came with liberation by units of Patton's Third Army. The U.S. Army saved my father's life. Otherwise, I wouldn't be giving this speech. My mother, Ilsa, had her own story. She was born in a poor farm region. Her family lived in a rundown old mill in the middle of the farm. She developed great strength working on that farm. And when she went to school, she had an intelligence that she didn't know she had. Her strength that she developed allowed her to do many jobs that were very difficult physically, and that even included being a high wire performer when she couldn't find any other job after the war. So my father developed a plan to start a new business, trucking business. He got reparations from the German government because he was a concentration camp survivor. He carried the troop that my mother eventually joined when she couldn't find work out in the country. She joined the high wire troop, and he carried their equipment. They stretched wires often between church steeples high above the ground. And in 1949, while they were at a location called Garmisch, a beautiful resort location, my mother met my father and they fell in love. But the troop had a very hard thing that happened to them. They had a member of the troop that drove a motorcycle on the high wire, and he fell off the wire to his death. My mother and father decided that they would quit the troop. I came along in 1950, and the family needed to have a stable place to live. But, you know, in those days, after World War II, both my parents had constant hunger while the World War wound down to its conclusion. Trying to find an apartment and food sources were nearly impossible. But with my father's attitude of tomorrow will be a better day, they were able to find an apartment. It wasn't much. One room and a bathroom that they had to share with other families. My parents wanted to have a better life. So they started considering moving or immigrating to the US from Germany. Also, there was another problem. My father heard whispers in the Germans around him, "Der da, der ist Jude." That guy's a Jew. He was tired of hearing statements like that, and that even made him more strongly inclined to leave Germany. His trucking business began to fail, and he got a mechanic's job with the US military. He got hiring preference because he was a concentration camp inmate. So this family, if they left Germany, they'd be having sacrifices because the reparations from the German government would no longer be there, and he'd have to give up that mechanic's job with the Americans. But they were still strongly convicted to leave the country. So, as Julius Caesar said, the die is cast. They gave up their precious apartment and moved into an internment camp for refugees. My father had used the fact that he was in a concentration camp to be declared a refugee, which helped his immigration status and ours too. So we went into this internment camp. It was actually a prison camp because you could go in, but they had to decide whether they'd let you out or not. We had intensive physical exams because the US government didn't want to have disease-ridden refugees enter into the US. That wasn't all. US Army intelligence officers interrogated my parents to see if they were communists or Nazis. When they were convinced that we were healthy, regular people, they released us from the camp. And we went to another camp in Bremerhaven, a port on the North Sea. Thank God we survived. Dad's mantra pulled us through again. And then the day came when we were about to board an old Liberty ship for the 2 to 3 week journey between Bremerhaven and New Orleans, where we would disembark. My grandmother was on the dock, and she cried so hard that her body shook visibly. Both she and my mother knew that they probably would never see each other again. So it was a hard and sad time for them. But then we approached New Orleans. The skipper decided not to dock right away because he wanted to come into port on June 14th, 1951, Flag Day. So eagerly and excitedly, we came down the gangplank to first set foot in the land of unlimited opportunities. But then my parents were in for a big shock. My father went into a restroom, and everybody in the restroom was just staring at him, as if to say, "What are you doing in here?" His immediate reaction was, "Oh no, not here, not in the US." My mother and I were sitting on a park bench outside the restroom, and we got the same look from a woman sitting at the end of the bench. What was going on? We surveyed the area, and then it occurred to us. The restroom was designated only for Black people. That really shook my father up, because he had seen the same thing happening to Jews during the Nazi times. The causation, I really didn't understand the causation until recently. Turns out that German lawyers had observed Jim Crow laws at work during the 30s. So the Nazi system of segregating Jews from non-Jews was influenced by the Jim Crow South. we decided we didn't want to sightsee and wanted rather to proceed to our place of permanent residence. So we hopped on a train and traveled to Petaluma, California, which is north of San Francisco, to begin our life in the land of unlimited opportunities. We were grateful to the Lutheran World Relief Organization for coordinating an introduction with a Lutheran church that had sponsored us coming here. The first few days, we had to stay behind the curtain of a multipurpose room of the church until a parishioner gave my dad his first job in a lumber yard and also gave us our first apartment. Then we really began to see the differences in living standards between the US and the old country. We got a single family house. It had 2 bedrooms, one for me and one for my parents. It had a bathroom that only my family used. What a difference between our house and that apartment in Frankfurt. We were the only occupants that used it. So there couldn't be any complaints about an occupied bathroom anymore. And my parents began to take advantage of the unlimited opportunities. They entered a local community college. They overcame their language challenges and got degrees. My mother continued to San Francisco State and became a 5th grade teacher. Later, she got 2 master's degrees, one in special reading problems and one in marriage and family therapy. She had a 16-year counseling practice. Not bad for a poor farm girl who had only made it to the 8th grade in the old country. My father got a job as a psychiatric technician in an institution for the developmentally disabled. Parenthetically, developmentally disabled people were also sent to concentration camps in the Nazi times. He had great pleasure and high respect from his colleagues taking care of developmentally disabled people. Until he retired. He was highly incensed by the tendencies toward Holocaust denial. And so he lectured to organizations who were dedicated to Holocaust remembrance, to educational institutions, and religious institutions of all faiths until almost the day that he died in 2014. But still, he remembered the pain and fear from the camps. He even cried 2 weeks before he died. But even to the end, he always had an attitude of tomorrow will be a better day. My mother retired from her practice and became active in her church, especially in her choir, which toured Europe and performed in Germany and even in St. Petersburg, Russia. My parents experiences really taught her 3 kids a lot about life and how to be quietly tough as she was. Their wisdom, my parents, gave me a safe haven to be who I became. Their wisdom helped me to be successful. My educational path was quite successful. I graduated in the top 10 of my high school class of 500. But at the beginning, before kindergarten, they told my parents that I shouldn't speak German at home. Otherwise, I'd have difficulties. That didn't prove to be correct. I performed my service in the U.S. Army in various places all over the world at various times. And after I got out, I continued my education and got a PhD in economics. I worked in civilian jobs as a corporate manager for various corporations, including United Airlines and Intel Corporation. And my last job was as a professor of economics. I will always remember my parents. I too, when I retired, became active in my church as a church council member, as a assisting minister, as a cantor, and I will continue to learn from my life as my parents encouraged me to do. And I have seen the life-changing experiences of Toastmasters. And I know in my heart that tomorrow will be a better day. Mr. Toastmaster.